So with me, I have, to my left, Ted Smith, who's the director of the Department of Economic Growth and Innovation with the city, Teresa Zawacki, who's the executive administrator for brownfields and local food initiatives, and also an urban garden expert, and Gina Dunlap, the assistant director at Metro Community Services and Revitalization. And I'll just start with Ted. What's your initial thoughts, and maybe say a little bit about some of the things that maybe we are starting on in this direction?
Well, first of all, I mean, it was a fantastic talk. Thank you so much. And it's always impressive when somebody can promote other people's books. So I don't have a book, so I don't have that problem. But I thought that was just really nice. That it's a big conversation.
Yeah.
It's a global conversation. It's for everybody across the socioeconomic spectrum. And I'm always curious when things can be just a little bit out of balance. I love justice. Obviously, justice is an important part of our democracy. But you know, what we've recently been studying as a community is compassion. And so often I jump from mercy, which is often sort of in opposition to justice as a mental kind of frame, compassion as a friend in mercy. And I think our road, at least as I've seen it, and certainly as our mayor has set it out, our road to getting to sort of the right side of history and the right side of humanity, I think has a lot to learn from this compassion exercise, which is not a highfalutin notion. It is a down on the street, in service, servant leadership, being involved in actually making that change that you want. And so I'm looking for the sort of the full conversation that respects where we are. When we have our sustainability plan, it'll be easy to do the word counts and see how we're doing for social justice in that. But on the other side is the imperative that we have to sort of move off of the path that we're on. And I think you said it very well, that we got all the science and we don't need any more studies. But what we don't really have enough of is the will. And so I view all of these things as highly confluent. And from where I sit, just sort of coming off a tour of duty and economic development, I'm watching very large companies in the United States struggle with the consequences of the way they've had to operate. The way they operate, publicly traded companies, just purely driven by scale. The only metric that matters for many very large companies is scale. Where's the next market that I can have most of? And it's not so interesting to be the market I've already had the most of. And so we're starting to see the pendulum, even in that sort of highly capitalistic framework, swing back to things like microfactories. And so we just recently had this great company come into town called Local Motors. Sounds like what it is. It was formed on the idea that maybe you could build a little factory that made the transportation resources that the city that it was in needed, and really not for anybody else necessarily, right? And so I sort of look at that, and here was, in our case, General Electric having that great insight that maybe we should make appliances for the people of Louisville and get good at understanding, what they need and how to anticipate that. And so for me, this is all very confluent. This is not about sustainability and do we have enough humanity in our sustainability agenda. It's really, do we have enough humanity in all of our agenda? And are we really thinking about this from, as you said, a commonsensical perspective? It is just common sense that you should want to spend time with your neighbors. It is just common sense that we should want opportunity for all peoples, right? And so I think we're just getting our lesson in common sense. And so I'm delighted to have this conversation. It's very timely, and this is the right crew to start it with.
Teresa.
Well, I want to echo Ted's compliment to you. I thought your presentation was thought-provoking and very relevant to a lot of the things that we're working on here in Louisville. And I think I want to build off Ted's experience working with the corporate sector to my experience working with the nonprofit sector and the academic sector in a lot of the things that I deal with on a daily basis. So brownfields, local food initiatives. For folks who aren't familiar with brownfields, this is a concept of underutilized or abandoned property that has either actual or perceived environmental contamination that frustrates its redevelopment. And in so many areas of the community, and really in every area of the community, there are properties that are blighted because of a perceived or an actual situation involving the soil or the groundwater. And beyond those two issues and beyond the concept of the blight itself, there's this perception of how the community relates to that property. What does that mean for your daily life? There are places that you can go in this city where there are single-family homes that are occupied by families that are right across the street from very large, very heavy industrial properties, some of which are in active operation and some of which are, quite frankly, not. They're idle. And so how the lives of those people who are in those houses, in those neighborhoods, are affected by those conditions, I think is really relevant to the work that a government does. Likewise, with food initiatives, I think there are opportunities to learn from the nonprofit sector and to learn from folks who've been working with issues of access and food justice and hunger, as well as obesity, in understanding how local government can provide support to those efforts and provide an understanding for ourselves as government employees and also for the community about those issues. So learning from folks who are active with neighborhood organizations, active with food access issues is really important to my work and has given me a good perspective sort of on the lay of the land, literally the lay of the land, as well as the community's relationship to those issues. So I think it's all very, as Ted said, connected and related.
Gina.
Yes, I have to agree. This is a very big topic. I appreciate sort of the additional lens that you've given me in terms of how I approach my work. I've been working in community development for 10 years here in Louisville, Kentucky. I am born and raised in this city. And so I've seen, our very own neighborhoods sort of change and evolve with the way the world's changing and evolving, particularly economic drivers. In a lot of the older neighborhoods, things are significant change. Evolution has been driven by, industrial shifts, population shifts, the aging population. All of that has had a significant impact on how we actually use and integrate with the built environment. One of the top priorities that I'm focusing on right now has to do with vacant, abandoned, and underutilized properties. Vacancy being driven by the housing market in particular, abandonment being driven by a lot of other factors, and then underutilization, like Teresa mentioned, with some of these larger industrial sites and the environmental contamination. What I find is that when I'm trying to explain as a government official to the community why things are the way they are, there's a lot we can say about the past, some good, some bad. The community tends to be somewhat reluctant to not see any, judgment in how those things came about. And I don't think that's something in Louisville, Kentucky that we can deny, that when it comes to allocation of resources across Jefferson County, that there is an imbalance there, a historical imbalance. And so I prefer not to concentrate so much on the past, but definitely we want to understand the why or how we got there, because what we have today really is a possibility. It's an opportunity to do something better, to do something different, to be innovative, and to do it in a really smart and thoughtful way that wraps in environmental issues, with economic issues, with other social issues. This is our time and opportunity to look forward and really make good on some of the potential, that's here. So, particularly with a lot of the people I come in contact with, it's hard to talk about being green when you're trying to survive on a daily basis. I think what we really have is a lifestyle challenge here in Louisville. So if you are affluent and if you have all of your basic needs met, it's sort of extra and easy, to do some of these green things. Like we recently passed a law about how you dispose of yard waste. Okay, so we need to put those in paper bags now, or we will be going forward. Well, they're expensive. It's a dramatic change in how people maintain their yards, but from a community development perspective, that's exactly what we want people to do, is maintain their yards so that the neighborhood looks great. And we want them to do that in an environmentally friendly way. But, there's also the practical aspects of asking people to do that. So I think when people are, when their basic needs are met, they certainly have a lot more latitude and opportunity to think beyond that into some of these sort of higher concepts that go with sustainability. So I do appreciate having this added lens to look at my work, and I think we do have a lot of opportunity to do some really great things going forward.
And I was going to kind of go to what I thought was kind of the meat of the topic here, and talk about the 9th Street, the Berlin Wall of Louisville.
Yes.
Talk about the fact that most of the vacant, abandoned, underused brownfield properties are in this part of town, which also has, of Portland Elementary School, only 4% of first graders are ready for elementary school when they get there. Low-income housing, I think in America, until like 1980, didn't even require insulation. So yes, we would build it, but then now there's this economic justice issue with people paying, a huge percentage of their, monthly salary to the utilities company just to stay warm. So then we have other projects like Project Warm, which do good stuff. After this great talk, what do we think? What are some things we're already working on as a city? Because I do think we are working on a lot of things. What are some of the immediate things? And maybe Dr. Agyeman has a couple other kind of specific action items we can take. And then I'm going to open it up to questions from you all.
You want to take it?
Well, since you mentioned 9th Street, the Move Louisville project, which is focused on creating more opportunity for multimodal and different opportunity for multimodal transportation around Louisville as a community, is focusing on 9th Street and ways to revision it so that it is less of a divide and more of a meeting place, a gathering place. And so there have been some great ideas generated through the Move Louisville project for creating a public park, for creating alternative ways to maintain transportation through that corridor, but also to reconnect neighborhoods that were fragmented as a result of the construction of 9th Street. And so that brings in a lot of other considerations. 9th Street's heavily used by truck traffic that's moving into the Park Hill Industrial Corridor. 9th Street has a giant interstate interchange that's built up as a ramp and a flyover. And all of those things need to be considered as part of the redesign and revisioning of 9th Street. But I think first and foremost in the minds of the Move Louisville team is this understanding and desire to address a physical piece of the built environment that has created so much social impact. So that's one thing that's happening right now.
I think if you look, and you know this better than I do, the collar communities that are immediately around our urban core are going through just an unprecedented rate of growth and redevelopment. And none of it the result of central planning, as I know you can attest to. Not that we wouldn't jump on board as soon as we see a parade. That said, I think some of this is healing itself at some level, and that's not to not take responsibility for it. It's to say we have a new generation coming up that doesn't value sprawl as much as their parents and their grandparents valued sprawl. And we are fortunate enough to have a cultural and architectural heritage and quite frankly, a physical layout that lends itself to community building, neighborhood development. And so in many ways, we're sort of fortunate that I guess the Southern Reconstruction wasn't going to be the big boom for Louisville, Kentucky, that everybody decided to go to Chicago a long time ago, leaving in place a tremendous amount of cultural asset that younger people are discovering and valuing, and I think that's across the socioeconomic spectrum. I mean, I don't think that's a special sort of white yuppie kind of a dynamic. I think it is a generally younger dynamic, and I think we have a lot of catching up to do to make sure that, in the case of public transit or however you want to think about connectivity, that we make it easy for people to make those decisions. So. Again, I think some of this is underway, and I think one role for the public sector to play is to sort of get out of the way for things that are really constructive, that are really good for our community, and then catch up in some cases to the pieces that only the public sector can really solve.
I think it's important to mention, or at least I'm excited about the Bingham Fellows. The 2014 class is focusing its attention on West Louisville right now. And I think we've all had an opportunity to engage with that group and sort of stimulate their thoughts in terms of what suggestions or actual actions they can take to make a difference. Part of what I'm excited about is Metro government's ability to engage people, to expose them to information, to educate, to equip them, and then actually to empower them. So when it comes to real estate and land use, business-minded people, are always looking for something that helps their bottom line. And I think there's a lot of opportunities west of 9th Street for people to take advantage of. But when I say take advantage, it's not about taking advantage or exploiting the opportunity, but doing something that's more organic in terms of respecting the people and the generations that have been there to date, while also welcoming in new, fresh, innovative people, and sort of having that cross communication and interculturalism that really does improve the quality of life. So the more that we can expose people, even those who've been in Louisville for a long time, who just aren't aware of what's going on west of 9th Street and what the possibilities are, sort of demystifying those stereotypes, I think that's always a positive thing.
Yeah. Dr. Agyeman, would you like a final comment before I open it up?
These are all great things. I mean, everybody, whenever I give these talks, what I realize is that the greatest resource that cities have is the people. Wherever I was in Phoenix recently, and I was thinking, why am I going to Phoenix? Why am I going to a city of 1.5 million in a hot desert? That's unsustainable. Why am I doing this? And it is unsustainable. And actually, somebody wrote a book about Phoenix, calling it the most unsustainable city in the world. But what's happened is it's bought everybody out. And the mayor, Greg Stanton, introduced me, and he said, one great thing about this city is we want to make change. I invite anybody to come to my office with good ideas, and we'll think about them. And so I get this energy. Whether it's I was in Cincinnati a couple of months ago, and here in Louisville, there's an energy for change. And it's one of the things about government is you have a hard job in the sense, you're all smiling, you do have a hard job, I don't need to tell you that, but you have a hard job in getting people to accept that you're making change. You're not often the best at trumpeting some of the changes that you make. So I can see a lot of good things that are happening here, and and I always make the offer once I've spoken at a place to help, and I'd love to come back. I'd love to actually visit. I usually just come in and go out again. I'd love to visit some of these areas. So next time I'll come and I'll
We'll do it. I officially invite you to come back to do an
absolutely.
idea festival. We'll do a tour of we'll start with New Lou and then go over to the Portland and Russell neighborhoods.
But there are lots of things that cities can do. Let me give you one example of. I think one of the most amazing things that a city, not in this country but in Brazil, is doing. Brazil, capitalist country, but the city of Belo Horizonte in northern Brazil is about 2.5 million people. In 1992, they decided we are going to abolish hunger in our city. The mayor developed with a whole range of social organizations and unions, developed a strategy around two concepts: social justice and food with dignity. The city actually supports the price of certain foodstuffs. So if you're on benefits, you get food that is supported at a certain price. The wholesalers can sell to the wealthy at the market price. There are popular restaurants, people's restaurants, which, again, food with dignity. These don't look like poorhouses. These look like really nice restaurants, which you get really good food at. Less than 2% of the city's budget. School performances have gone through the roof because kids are going to school, with good food. In 20 years, there's been a marked increase in performances. I was at a conference, and this young woman was saying how she was a single mother, unemployed, and then she heard about this city scheme it's a women's empowerment scheme. They were given a lot. They were given a long-term lease on it. They were given training on urban agriculture. She now sells food to her daughter's school, organically grown food, and she trains other women in urban agriculture. And this is in a capitalist country. This is not socialism. How is it that cities in Brazil can do this? Well, one thing is it's conspicuously about social justice. Now, if you look at food plans for our cities, or you look at Toronto, you look at Seattle, any big city's food plan, it says equity, a more equitable food system. You've got to be explicit about social justice. If you're not explicit, you don't trip over social justice and say, whoops, there's social justice. It doesn't just happen. It has to be intentional. So I do say, you know, when I hear the word compassion, I get it, but what does compassion look like in policy terms? Because social justice is measurable. What are your indicators of compassion? How are you measuring through the budget and sort of allocations process? How do you measure compassion?
All right, that's a great... All right, let's go to Dr. Gilderbloom.
Hello. I want to first thank for doing this. This is one of the few spaces, actually, where we can actually, as the University of Louisville, can actually come and speak and interact with people and so on. And I want to also congratulate my editor here, who's, I just learned 15 minutes ago you accepted another article of mine about Louisville and about thinking about environment and so on.
It was close.
And I would buy his book. It is great. It is. I read it in one night. It was beautiful, and he pointed out all the good things and so on. It'll be required reading in my class as well. First of all, I just want to engage you. I did meet for the first time Ted Smith a couple nights ago, and I engaged him, and I was happy to meet him. There is a gulf here. We got a problem in West Louisville, and I've said it over and over again in op-ed pieces and so on. And the administration keeps missing it. These multi-lane, one-way streets, which you call unjust and uncivil and everything like that, majority of them are running through the black neighborhoods of Louisville, whether it's Smoketown or West Louisville. This is not part of the discussion at all, but we know that it leads to, in the case of Breckenridge now, a 70% decline in valuation, abandonment, foreclosures, and so on, where the value of a block from a two-way street goes from $3 million down to a $1 million value. So the first thing you can do, and we've been begging the mayor to do this, is change those residential streets in black neighborhoods to two-way and give what the residents there have wanted in our charrettes, representing over 100 people, and give them calm streets, trees. We know that there's a 1/3 less trees there as well. Give them community gardens, and you could change the face of these black neighborhoods and make them grow. And this is what we've done in Washington, D.C., in Pittsburgh, and so on, where I've helped work as a consultant, directing over $3 billion, creating over 16,000 housing units. Where we worked in East Russell, we've created over 600 units doing that same thing. But now Leadership Louisville, which you just touted, is now calling for increased speeds, one-way streets, and eliminating bike lanes or anything like that. Second problem you have in Louisville, and it's a big problem in West Louisville. You talked about houses near chemical factories. We have an article that's going to be coming out very shortly, along with 2 medical journal articles, is that we have one of the most worst air, worst water, and soil in West Louisville. And people are dying. And in these areas, up to 100,000 people prematurely die by 10 years. In other words, living in West Louisville or going to school in West Louisville, because of the toxic waste and the brownfields, is causing people to lose 10 years of their life. Statistically proven. And that's a really scary thing. It's not just a few neighbors or something like that. I work with people in the Blackleaf. I've never seen you guys at the meetings, but I work with the Blackleaf Association, and we see children with lead and poisoning in their hair and in their bodies. It's disgusting. And how can someone even think about taking people, letting their children go to these schools? And this is all correlated in these academic research that we publish. The third problem, I think, is this divide. It's just not a wall between 9th Street and so on, which exists, but there's this divide between government and the University of Louisville, We are not at the table. We don't participate in Leadership Louisville. We're not asked to do any research. They've given out $2.5 million in research to consultants from all over the world, but we're not part at the table. Yet we're ranked as the 23rd best planning school, a little bit behind Julian's. So we need to, and I feel emotional about this. I came here to make change, to make a greater environment. I lived in a great city, San Francisco and Santa Barbara. I drank good water. The soil was good for planting and so on. But you folks can do so much to change. What Gil has done in Nulu, I fully support. What Gil is trying to do to change the streets from one-way to two-way, I fully support. And there's like what we called yesterday, pockets of hope. There is pockets of hope in East Russell. There is pockets of hope in the Highlands, Nulu, and perhaps in Portland as well. So I just want to lay it out. I know it's all happy, happy talk and so on. But what concerns me also, and I raised this with Ted, is there's going to be an expansion of a chemical plant coming soon to Louisville that no one's talking about. And how much more dangerous is that going to be? That's 12 blocks from the university. So I leave that with you. I love you all. But let's make this Louisville a great city. It used to be in 1906. Come on.
Thank you so much. Dr. Gilderbloom's always writing and talking about good. We have a microphone right here. There's another question back here next.
Yeah, I have worked with inmates, so the David concept, I see tons of Davids, and the visuals are really powerful. What came to mind was for instance, the recent spate of violence we've had in Louisville with the youth, and the thing with the buses where they took charge of that. Ted, your concept of eggs, those eggs came to mind. It's like, and Anthony Smith, who's trying to work with this kid. I mean, this just doesn't happen where people are involved, where they feel like they're part of change and what's going on. So I'm thinking that maybe we could work with the kids to get involved in your whole egg concept. And the other thing that comes to mind with Leadership Louisville, we've priced that out of anybody's range who wants to be involved in that, in the West End, or in the lower. A lot of times the companies will pay for people to go through Leadership Louisville, but the people we really need to involve don't have those kind of jobs.
There are scholarships, but we do need more.
We need a lot more. We need to get the kids involved. And right now I actually live in Indiana, right across the river, exit 0, and I'm thinking I need to go back to my neighborhood association, whose meetings are actually painful to attend, and I don't think anybody's here from. Since it's Indiana, I don't really have to risk that. That's a whole other divide we need to deal with. But they're painful because we don't invite the renters. We have the same tired people trying to do the same tired things because we just don't invite the renters to get involved because, it's the protective people. Right now I'm trying to figure out a way, and I've been working on this, trying to figure out a way to sneak in some of my inmates into work in my garden because that's that whole other piece. And again, I think I'm okay because I don't think anybody here is from my neighborhood association. But it's that whole inclusiveness that we really, really actively need to work with and fast, especially with this youth thing going on in Louisville. Yeah. So those are mostly ideas for you all, but whatever. But that's where I'm headed with this. We need to get the Davids actively involved in a way that makes it happen fast rather than just wait for wonderful people like Gil to make it happen gradually. Thanks.
Let's go right over here, and then we'll come back to right here in the middle. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Dr. Judy Heitzman from the Kent School of Social Work at University of Louisville, and I want to thank you very much for your focus on the social justice impact of integrating all of this with what we're talking about. A couple of things. Number one, object to West Louisville being called Black Louisville. It's poor Louisville. And there's a disproportionate number of black people in poor Louisville. The second thing is, we talked about Nulu as one of the spots of hope, but in order to create Nulu, we displaced a huge number of people that were in a housing project by the name of Clarksdale. The same thing we did when we renovated the Park Duval neighborhood, and what we may be planning to do again, I'm not sure, in Portland and Park Hill and other areas. So my thinking is, how do you integrate and create new neighborhoods with vitalization without displacing all the poor people in the neighborhood and taking away their voice and what they need? And some of this was spoken to, but I'd like to hear more from the panel, and particularly from this young woman who's representing that neighborhood. Thank you. Whose name I didn't get, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Gina.
Gina Dunlap, and you make some valid points and observations. And, I agree that this is really not a race issue per se, as it is, a class issue. And to the extent that, from a planning perspective, it makes sense to calm down a street or plant more trees, you have to be sensitive to the fact that the residents that are there, you may like the way the street configuration is, and that's what helps them interact more with their neighbors, or the cost associated with maintaining trees that are planted, that's going to fall on the residents there. So the process is what's really important in terms of how those decisions are made. And so people need to be engaged. There needs to be, a table set, and they need to be invited. And the other part to that, though, is that the ones you want to invite into the conversation, who ultimately are going to help arrive at the solution, need to be equipped to do so. So, they've got to have the same information that everybody else is privy to, so transparency becomes important. And then they've got to be equipped and encouraged and supported in mobilizing. So, west of 9th Street, there are at least 10 different neighborhoods. And as the professor pointed out, their diversity is growing in those neighborhoods. There's large immigrant populations that are migrating to these neighborhoods. So the fragmentation amongst the residents of those neighborhoods is probably the biggest barrier to effectively mobilizing so that you can have a voice in the conversation. I don't think anybody wants government to come in, however well-intended, and gift, two-way streets when that perhaps, disrupts what is already going on in the neighborhood, and those residents feel perfectly fine with it. At the same time, there's always a mix. There's lots of diversity, different situations in any neighborhood, and anybody that wants to create change or improve the quality of life there has to factor in what's currently going on and realize that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. But I believe the process and the engagement throughout that process and letting or allowing residents to be a part of the solution is critical there.
Yeah, I don't think that's optional. I mean,
No.
it's sort of interesting because, I know these were questions. We didn't have a lot of chance to answer here. So I would say that, if you look at the bigger history of our area, we're just digesting city-county merger. That stuff doesn't happen overnight. We all understand. We're working that through our system. One of the unintended consequences of being this metro region was a sort of a neglect, not intentionally, but a neglect then of the hyper-local. And concepts like spatial justice become apparent when you start defining yourself with broader borders, right? And so we are just now having that conversation around West Louisville about, well, who cares the most, right? And I think, and I don't mean to be critical of the professor, but this notion of, well, we'll yell at government, we'll yell at central planning to go fix it. There's very little evidence that central planning has actually done very much anywhere in the world. And so when I look at the nature of pollution, the air quality thing, I actually know a lot about air quality. And, it's actually something that we all share. And so if I take a chemical company and I move it out of Louisville, you would be a fool to imagine you won't be breathing whatever it emits, because we all share a thin film that surrounds the planet. So the notion of how we will solve these problems is very different. It's not get out of my backyard, I'll chase you out. It's, okay, how do we deal with the realities of overconsumption? How do we deal with the realities of disenfranchised classes? There are problems to own. There are no simple answers. The government's not going to solve it for you. As the president likes to say, the government's not going to turn the TV off at night for your kids, right? So, there is an element of personal responsibility here. And I think in this Bingham Fellows Project with Leadership Louisville, you see emerging, where is the voice of the community? It's critically important that it is owned by the community, critically important. Not something gifted to, handed to, dictated to, but something owned by. And your wonderful example with the bus depot, that's the best example, right? That it's, you know what? We can figure this out together. And I do expect government to come to the table when we're going to have a constructive dialogue to work on this together. Because we understand the moral hazard of not actually working on it together. So I'm very encouraged that after we've digested merger, we have to come back to a phase that is a little more local to make up for the things that we then missed in the sprawl.
And I just want to jump in and say that this is, again, going back to what I said earlier about what we as government can learn from community organizations and nonprofits that are working in these areas. When we approach problems in communities, taking an approach that's more like a community empowerment model and more like a community development model works for us. When we go at it saying, here's our resource, people go do what you will with it, that tends to be a little off-putting to folks and a little bit more like throwing up a barrier than providing an opportunity. So one of the things that I wanted to recognize is the good work that the university is actually doing as part of that community empowerment model, particularly in the context of brownfields through the Center for Environmental Policy and Management. The center has been our community engagement partner for the past at least 10 years to create community dialogue in places and in ways that the city is itself not likely to succeed in doing. And so by creating a platform for a common understanding of what can be a very technical and complicated and scary issue, we have had great success in understanding from the community perspective how we can best use the resources of government to address a problem.
Great. All right. A couple of housekeeping. Sorry, there is no more time for questions.